Hotep, and welcome. Good to see you all again in this week's version of Matters of Diversity with Dr. B. Today, we are going to be doing a show surrounding women, and it's on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And, violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating human rights violations in our world today, remaining largely unreported due to the impunity, the silence, the stigma, and the shaming that goes around it. This Declaration for the Elimination of Violence Against Women is issued by the UN General Assembly in 1993. And it defines violence against women as an act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether it occurs in public or in private life. Today, I have two phenomenal guests that are going to help support our conversation around the topic today. And first, we have Karina Powell, who is a PhD candidate at the UCF Department of Sociology. Originally from Kazakhstan, Karina received a Fulbright scholarship to study in the University of Oregon, where she had graduated with a master's degree in international studies prior to joining UCF. Karina studied in Lund University in Sweden, and interned in the United Nations headquarters in New York, and worked in universities in Kazakhstan. Her doctoral dissertation investigates how oil affects attitudes towards violence against women and families in former Soviet countries. She teaches several undergraduate courses, including patterns of domestic violence in society, sex and gender, sociology of deviant behavior. Karina is also working on a project in co-authorship with Dr. Amy Reckenwald that investigates patterns of non-fatal intimate partner strangulation based on Broward County's police forensic records examination. Next, we have Tamara Nelson. Tamara. I keep messing up her name, and I'm apologizing already. Tamara Nelson is a staff therapist at Counseling and Psychological Services, which is CAPS, here at UCF. She's a licensed mental health counselor within the state of Florida, certified clinical trauma professional, and a registered yoga teacher with the Yoga Alliance. Tamara's areas of interest and clinical focus include trauma and abuse recovery, religious, spiritual concerns, racial trauma, substance use or disorders, and multicultural concerns. Tamara currently runs a therapy group for Black identified female students at UCF and co-facilitates a community support group for Black female survivors of interpersonal trauma. So thank you both for being here today. Sorry to Tamara, I keep doing that because I'm so used to saying Tamara, for butchering your name today. So hopefully that does not be seen as me having some type of a act towards you, but my goodness, that name is now messing with me right now. Tamara, I have to say it several times fast. All right, and so how are you all doing today? What's going on? How's life today for you two?
I guess I'll start. And it's Tamara.
Tamara.
Yeah. And I guess like a mixture of feelings. In some ways, I'm doing good. Some days are harder than others. I think with the combination of going through the pandemic and working and especially working as a therapist, you're carrying kind of a lot of the weight of our clients as well as what we're going through personally. So it's hard to give a concise answer as to how I'm doing, but I'm here and I'm glad to be here today.
Excellent. How about you, Karina?
First of all, I just wanted I really appreciate the invitation to this podcast, and I'm glad to be a part of this important talk about such an urgent matter. I'm doing, I guess, well. I'm working from home. I'm working on my dissertation. As you said, I'm a doctoral candidate from the Department of Sociology. It's a little bit better now because my kid now is doing face-to-face mode of studies. He's a kindergartner. So before that, he was at home, which is kind of challenging.
Yeah.
You can't really do anything for yourself while you have a little one on the side who needs your, supervision and attention. Otherwise, thank you for asking. We are hanging there.
So what is your thoughts on today and the fact that it is devoted to women, especially those who have experienced violence? What comes up for you today when you think about that?
Hmm. Well, a lot. So prior to working for UCF, I was a therapist for Victim Service Center of Central Florida. So all of my work, clinical work at that time, was focused on violence, different forms of violence, mostly sexual violence, and the majority of my clients were, of course, women. And so just kind of preparing for today and reflecting on this day brought up a lot of my experiences working with that organization. And I do a lot of trauma work now at CAPS. And so I'm still seeing a lot of female identified students who have just experienced a lot of violence in their history, whether it be childhood or during adulthood. So it's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I have my own experiences as well. So it's a heavy topic, but it's a super important topic.
Right.
I'm really glad that we are having the conversation.
So how does it necessarily present itself to UCF, as to students at UCF? How does that look? Have you heard, or do you have some statistics at all on how women at UCF are dealing with this issue?
Yeah, I off the top of my head, I don't have the statistics, but in terms of like what I've seen in my room, especially again with me being one of the trauma focused therapists there, a lot of the referrals for students coming in for that reason, I see a lot of those clients, and it's a very unfortunately a common experience
Okay.
amongst college women, and even happening on campus. Some have been experienced violence from like faculty before, and so it's not even just like other students. So it's just it's a common experience.
And so, Karina, it comes in various forms. It's not just maybe physical violence, but other types of violence is there, do you see?
That's correct. Yes, violence especially intimate partner violence, for example, as you mentioned, disproportionately affecting women and girls around the globe. And it's not just physical violence; it could be emotional violence, economic violence, physical, psychological violence, sexual violence. So it comes in many forms,
Mm-hmm.
and especially now during the pandemic, as Tamara mentioned, it's affecting our communities even stronger. Like I am as a PhD student, I don't only do the theory and like analysis, I also keep an eye on what's going on around the world. And since my interests are also like set in outside of the US, so I'm
Right.
looking at different statistics. So the media reports from different countries describe an alarming increase in domestic violence incidents in some region during the pandemic. At the same time, other regions experience the opposite. For
Right.
example, shelters and police report sudden drop in the numbers of domestic violence cases that are reported. However, the experts in the field know that that doesn't mean that the rates actually decreased. It
Yeah.
actually means that the victims of domestic violence unable to reach out safely for these services. They're just actually, basically locked up in the same room with the abusers. They cannot use the phone. For example, in
Right.
Italy, in the very beginning of the pandemic, I know that Italy being affected pretty badly. So they did notice the decrease in the number of reported cases, but I mean the calls, not the reported cases. The
Right.
calls to the hotline But the texting and messaging, they were overflooding. They were like just screaming SOS because they could not reach out and actually talk to these people. So similarly in Florida, happening kind of the same thing, like all the many counties, like including Orlando Police Department, Orange County, Osceola County, Santa Police Department, they all were reporting the decrease in domestic violence cases. However, the shelters, like including Harbor House and the other shelters that are in Florida, they are reporting the increase in the text messages and the calls to the hotlines. So what's happening is basically many women are trapped with the abusers at home. They cannot safely reach out for the help. So this statistical paradox is kind of the intimate partner violence right in a hot spot, like putting all these victims, in the center of our attention. That's what who needs the help.
So how do we, when we're in our day-to-day routines, kind of detect, or what are some things that we can be on the lookout for when we might suspect that someone is dealing with this type of violence against them?
Right. I'm sorry, is it a question for me or?
Either one.
Well, I can just go ahead and done with my talking.
We'll go both ways. You can
right.
go and you can go.
I'm very glad you asked that question, because this is very important. One of the important solutions that might actually help to the victims of intimate partner violence, especially women, that the community should be more aware of what's going on in the house next door. Well, I'm not saying that we must spy on each other like all the time. I'm not saying that, but just simply apply this rule. When you see something, say something or do something. For example, if you see a person in distress, you might ask if this person needs help, if everything is all right. Sometimes just showing the simple courtesy as a neighbor can save someone's life, specifically in domestic violence cases. And right now, when they're trapped, all they could see maybe in like weeks or month is a neighbor when they're going to check the mail or, take the trash out or something like that. So it is important to just be aware of different signs. It's not necessarily bruises.
Right.
Because sometimes people cover the bruises, or they just try not to show them, so they won't be as visible. But the emotional distress, the fact that the person is not showing out, like not going anywhere, not talking to anyone, that
Not
could be
doing
also
normal practices, so to speak.
right.
Not doing things that you've seen them do in the past. Is there something that might be in their voice or how they speak? Are there things that we can be on the lookout for, code words or anything that we could be, mindful of when we're dealing with individuals?
I'm not aware about specific like code words, because it could work different to different people. I mean, some people do try to reach out by writing little notes and trying to give it to people to reach out for the help. Sometimes you just leave a note somewhere where people can see them. For example, the mailboxes where people can actually have an access to. So those are important signs that should not be ignored. If you see something like that, and just throw it away or ignore it, like, try to reach out to this person who actually needs help. And it's also important to also check on your family members, like to stay in touch and support each other. I mean, this is a hard time, but we are in this together and we should be there for each other, like just checking on them, because sometimes even with the families that, like, everything looks fine, like from the outside, but then these people lost their jobs. They trapped in the same house. The children might be, they might even lose the access to the daycare, and some schools are also like on remote learning mode. So all these conditions, they are waiting on these people, of course, like especially economical, burdens. So that's why the violence can escalate, or simply within the family. So that's why it's important just to be there and to check on this. Exactly.
Yeah, Tammy and Tamara. I keep doing it. Now I'm going to mess up the whole show, aren't I? Tamara.
Yeah. I tell people, if you're familiar with the show Sister, I say Tamara like TNT.
I'm not.
Okay, never mind.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to get it before the end of the show. Tamara, I got it. I'm going to do it. But go ahead.
So I was just to add what Karina is saying in terms of like things to look out for. I think it also for noticing like the individual starts to withdraw or like is not communicating as often, is kind of isolating from family and friends. That's definitely a big red flag because abusers tend to cut that person off from the most important people in their life.
Right.
So, but I think ultimately we have to have relationships with people to even notice that something is different. And that's where that community aspect comes in, and knowing your neighbors, knowing your friends, and actually talking to them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of times we do just walk past our neighbors, right? We don't even engage in any type of way. I see people all the time sitting with friends even, and they're texting or they're doing something on their phones. They're together, but they're not necessarily communicating to one another. Things
Right.
so in the cases that you see coming into UCF, specifically students, but maybe there's, those who are on staff as well. When you say they come in and they do this, are they coming in because someone's bringing them? Are they on their own? Is it part of the hotline? What are some of the things that bring these cases to your attention?
Mm-hmm. It's all of the above. Some people come because a friend or it could be a partner who maybe knows the person has a history of intimate partner violence. We'll usually encourage them to seek counseling. So I do see that a lot when we're doing intake sessions. They'll say, I didn't really want to come myself, but so-and-so thought it would be a good idea. Faculty members have referred students. So a lot of times they'll probably be the first ones to see signs that something isn't right, or, the person's not coming to class, or they're not submitting assignments. And then they may check in with that student and then find out, okay, there's a history of whatever, or this person's currently in a situation, and then they refer them. So we see that a lot as well.
So how safe is the facility once they get there? They're already nervous about possibly presenting this type of information, but how safe are they once they're there, and what happens? What's the process once, they are in that situation?
Right. So with therapy is a confidential service. So everything that they're sharing in session is protected information. Somebody can't just call and say, hey, did so-and-so come, or so-and-so applying there. We never can confirm or deny if somebody's actively a client. So they're protected in that sense as well. So the confidentiality factor is something I, like to emphasize to students so that they can feel some level of safety with pursuing services with us. Now, there is a challenge with being in the age of COVID-19, and we're doing sessions virtually, and instead of them physically coming to a building. So depending on the safety of that person's environment, that can be a barrier to seeking services. So sometimes we have to get creative with where they can have the session and not pose a risk to that person's safety.
So they may possibly, a scenario could be that they get followed by the partner.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're going there, what are the precautions that are in place for them, just if that is the scenario?
Mm-hmm. You said in a situation where maybe the partner is following them to?
Very suspicious of the fact that they're going somewhere. They leave the house and they follow them, and they end up at CAPS, or they end up somewhere where there's services being conducted. And they get there, and someone who is the partner is there or enters the space. Mm-hmm. What types of mechanisms do you have in place to kind of to help them still stay safe in this type of a situation?
Yeah, so if we're talking about like a situation where they're physically coming to the CAPS building and not like virtually. Right. So again, once the client is in the building and in the room, nobody can just walk through the hallways. Like the doors are locked, so it's not like a free roaming space. The lobby would probably be the only area where, students could go in and out. And this is assuming we're not in a pandemic state.
Right, right.
So
So you have access to the police and other officials that may come in if something like that would occur.
Right, yeah. So if a student expressed that, hey, I'm concerned that somebody's following me, we would definitely, talk about, okay, do we need to call UCF-PD, which is right on campus? We would definitely safety plan with that student depending on what the circumstance and what they're wanting to do in that situation.
Excellent, excellent. Anything to add there, Karina?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that while I was teaching at UCF, I had several students reaching out to me that they were experiencing certain problems with their intimate partners, and actually 2 of them were belong to LGBTQ community, and I just wanted to emphasize how it was more challenging, more harder for them to even talked about it, because I noticed some signs of distress, and I was just asking how were they doing, like, is there anything I can help them with, and a person actually started talking and mentioning that there are certain issues, and I always refer them to the victim services at UCF. Christine Martin and her team, we are always in touch. Like, I invited them to my even to present during my classes, and I always make sure that I talk about it during my class to let the students know that this is the services that are available, like basically 24/7 on campus, and there are different things that they can be referred with, like anybody who is impacted by crime, violence, and abuse can basically refer to the center. And so what I noticed is that for the LGBTQ community, victims of abuse, it's harder to reach out for help. So that's why I think it's important to provide certain services, and I know that we do at UCF, and Tamara will piggyback me here. We do have the specialists who focus on specifically this group of people and provide a service that would be applicable in certain cases. And again, a confidentiality issue, it's very important. We have the Title IX at UCF that we all have to follow. And nothing, basically, if anyone refer to you, like with a faculty or a student, and you're referring them to certain services, it will always stay between you and that person. Yes. So I think it's like here at UCF, we have one of the best, I think, service providers in this kind of sense, because I don't think I've seen this prolific victim services anywhere in other campuses. So I was pretty impressed when I joined.
So you bring up LGBTQ issues, and just last week we celebrated, or we had the Day of Remembrance, Transgender Day of Remembrance. How affected by violence is that community, and what are some things that we can be doing to support our transgender partners?
Tamara, I guess you could jump in here.
Dr. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I just when it comes to transgender violence and things along those lines, we just had Transgender Day of Remembrance last week, and so my question is, what are ways that we could be on the lookout and supportive of individuals who are dealing with violent situations from the transgender community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and marginalized communities in general are higher risk for violence, and I think there needs to be, and that's the beauty of Trans Awareness Week, is it's about raising the visibility and awareness, and I think that's part of what's important here is people need to be educated. They need to be aware of how serious of an issue this is, because the trans community has not been protected in the way that they really need to be as a vulnerable community when it comes to violence. So I would say definitely being educated, knowing the statistics, the resources. So we have organizations community-wise and on campus that are designated for those communities. We have the center on campus, LGBTQ services on campus. Even at CAPS, we have a trans care team. So we have therapists that are specifically designated and have experience working with the trans community.
Excellent.
So having those safe spaces are very critical because marginalized communities, although most vulnerable, are a lot of times less likely to seek out help and support because they don't feel safe to do so and fear of being further victimized if they reach.
Excellent, thank you. So Karina, your dissertation is in part dealing with this violence. Can you talk a little bit about what you're studying and what you're hoping to have accomplished with the research that you're bringing forth?
Yes, of course. So I study intimate partner violence, and currently I'm working on a dissertation that is dedicated to examining the impact of oil curse on social attitudes towards acceptability of wife beating in the former Soviet countries. Kazakhstan is one of them. That's where I'm from. So we kind of know the region, know the area.
Right.
So what inspired me to pursue the project is that in 2017, the two largest countries from the region, including Kazakhstan, where I'm from, and Russia, decriminalized domestic violence, which means that there was a legislation against domestic violence at place, but then they decided they don't longer need that. So of course, that's met huge international outrage, and people just, especially the activists, the women advocates, they didn't understand what happened there. But there were lots of different factors, of course, that affected these decisions. And what I was interested to find out is how the society actually feels about that. Like, are there any specific attitudes that support this kind of decision? Because obviously it was not based on certain surveys. Nobody asked people before they did that, the criminalization. I mean, so while the oil curse, I just was looking to different angles to look at this problem. And while I was researching the region, I found out that there were some interesting transitional things going on there, including the curse of the oil, of petroleum curse, which affects specifically transitional, like developing countries that does not have a certain political institutions at place that would help to maintain, the control that the distribution of the wealth. And what happened is that these countries are negatively affected by the abundancy. So that's the paradox of oil. So instead of having the prosperous economies and all of that, these countries ended up having the highest rates of corruption, the bigger gender equality gaps, and all the other negative consequences, including petroleum patriarchy. One of the researchers, Michael Ross, argues that oil also impacts the way women are treated in the society and the status of women in the society. So I decided to test this theory on attitudes towards acceptability of wife battery, basically applying that theory to intimate partner violence field, which never happened before. And I thought it will be interesting to find out if there are any, if there is anything there. So right now I'm done with my analysis, proceeding to my conclusion and discussion chapters. And there are some pretty interesting findings that I did not expect to happen. So I just don't want to spoil the trailer.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would just say that I would just say, like, in general, that oil curse does in fact affect attitudes towards wife battery, and whilst there are some other factors that affect that, of course, and intervene, cross and crisscross. But the theory itself, like basically being proved. So
Right.
it was quite an interesting project, and I'm pretty sure that it could be applicable in the other settings. Like I'm planning to do, for example, the same for different parts of the United States. Like for example, the Texas, the Dakotas, the mines, anywhere where there's abundance in the resources, and to see how does that affect the local, not necessarily social attitudes, but also might be laws, for example, right? We have like different states have different, we have different provisions there. And so I just want to see how that would play out. So thank you for asking.
So the participants in your study, women? Mainly?
I take I work with the secondary data from World Values Survey. So I have like 18,000, like the survey was taken in 2010, 2014. That's the wave 6. And the sample is not 18, 14,000 people, yes, from 10 Soviet countries.
Okay.
Yes, out of 15.
Excellent. So, Tamara, tell me how you integrate maybe some of the things that you do. I mean, you talk about yoga and what that is. Is there something that you utilize in that technique that supports some of the clients that you're coming in that are dealing with some of this abuse?
Yeah, so I've been doing yoga for like 8 years now. I'm originally self-taught, and then I recently became a certified yoga teacher. And just in my own practice, it's very instrumental with easing, dealing with anxiety, being able to achieve a level of like physical relaxation in the body, being able to connect with the body. And when we talk about violence, that's trauma, and trauma as well lives in the body. And so a lot of people who experience any form of trauma, violence, typically have a hard time relaxing or being calm, and are often hypervigilant. So in my work with clients, I do teach a lot of like principles from yoga, a lot of concepts from yoga. So breathing, deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. So just being able to connect with the body, releasing tension in the body, even reconnecting in the sense, because another aspect of experience of violence, especially sexual violence, is clients will tend to feel very disconnected from themselves, and yoga is a great way of kind of reintegrating your connection with your body. So yeah, that's some of the ways that.
So I see it as an empowerment, so to speak. So there's a way that women can be empowered. How does that maybe translate into leaving relationships or dealing more efficiently, if that's even a way to deal with it, a person who is being violated in such a manner?
Mm-hmm. So like ways that someone can become like re-empowered after.
Re-empowered, yeah. Can yoga do that? Or how does counseling in general help someone move away from that type of existence?
Yeah, so that can look different for different people, but I know just at the most basic level, as a therapist working with trauma, I'm very conscious of choice, giving my clients the choice and control in the therapy room, what they want to talk about, what they don't want to talk about, how they want their therapy to look. And it starts there with being able to teach the client that they do have autonomy over themselves, and they are able to make choices. And then that can also look like, like you said, somebody leaving a relationship that's not serving them or that's not healthy, being able to create boundaries with toxic families and friends that are contributing to their well-being. So regaining control over themselves and being able to make choices that are in their best interests, and even being able to plan for the future and having goals for themselves.
Right. You know, there's a lot of talk sometimes around a person not being able to leave a situation, the fear that's involved with leaving that situation, or just how to take care of themselves. And the role of a counselor is not to force anyone to leave a situation, right? It's to really support them in how they want to go about that, right? And so what are some of those situations like, and what can people expect when they go to a counselor when they're experiencing such traumatic situations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it can be difficult for anyone, whether you're a friend, therapist, and seeing somebody in a abusive situation, abusive relationship, and internally we want them to leave, but that's not our choice to make. And like you said, we're there to support them in the direction that they want to go in. So that's number one. And I think we also have to understand that it's not easy to leave an abusive situation. There's so much that goes into it. There's the risk to their safety. Once somebody leaves an abusive situation, that's the time when they're most in harm's way or most at risk. There's the financial aspect. If they've been financially dependent on this person, how are they going to support themselves? If there's children involved, that makes things very complicated. There's the psychological aspect of, being under somebody's control. You may not have the confidence to leave. You may have a lot of fears. So there's just a lot that has to be processed and worked through, and a lot of planning that has to happen for someone.
So I can imagine that moving into that type of a realm of the possibility of leaving is traumatic, right? I can sense that in terms of that. But there has to be some success stories that you have kind of come across. And what are some of the things that people can look forward to? What are some of the things that women who are dealing with these types of violent situations can kind of also put into their radar, right? So maybe fear of leaving, what will I be able to do? How can I protect myself? How can I care for my children and all those other things? But there must be success stories that they can also kind of be aspirational for those who are in that type of situation. Is that even a part of the counseling situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there definitely are success stories. I've worked with many clients who have been able to get out of abusive relationships. And there are resources that are out there to help women, since we're talking about women, to get out of these situations. And just also knowing that, again, coming to a therapist or a domestic violence shelter or whatever resource, we're not here to kind of rip the Band-Aid off or force you into something that they may not be ready for at that moment, and just knowing that they have control over that process. And this is a gradual thing. So I think just knowing that maybe will help some individuals have a little bit of ease of starting the process.
Yeah, that's perfect role modeling too. I think what you just shared, like, they have control. Mm-hmm. And so if they can even take that baby step moving forward, like, I have this control right now. I can control my existence. If I can control it in this space, then maybe I can do it in my home as well.
Right, exactly.
Very powerful, very powerful. Karina, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what you guys were talking about, and the control part that you, Dr. B, brought. I think usually victims of intimate partner violence, they come to services when violence escalates to a certain point where they understand that they are in danger. Sometimes they would stay for years and years tolerating the violence, and sometimes they don't even recognize this as a violence anymore. That's why, like, I believe, Tamara, if you guys were using this the violence wheel, the power and control wheel, that's what is actually shows what kind of what kind of signs of the violence behavior exist to show the victim that she or he is in actual violent situation, like things like using coercion and threats, using intimidation, using emotional abuse, economic abuse, male privilege, children, using isolation there for the pandemic, for example, is getting worse with that one, minimizing, denying, and blaming. So this whole thing is just, what's in the middle of it is power and control. So basically, this person who is this person who is the abuser is trying to maintain the power and control over the other person using different kind of ways. And sometimes, like, tolerating this for years and years, the person sometimes not even realizing that he is or she is trapped in this kind of situation. So that's why it's important to raise awareness about this kind of issues, to talk about it openly, to assure that there is a confidential support in our communities. Like, for example, we're talking about UCF, or we're talking about Orlando or Florida, that the people are there, the professionals who are there, ready to help and ready to provide certain resources, maybe for the first time, or maybe just even to realize, to show this person that this is the situation, that it might escalate to something very dangerous for your life and maybe life of your children. So I'm sure you have that on place, Tamara. As I said, UCF, we have the best services in this regard.
So, it's really interesting that you brought that up, because my next question was really going to be about children and those individuals who have seen this type of violence in their lives as children and then grow up and get right into that almost same type of situation in their own relationships. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what that's like. And have you ever had situations where you had a person who was being in that type of a situation bring their children to counseling as well? And what does that look like? And is there something that can be helpful, that they can empower each other to kind of break the cycle?
I personally don't work. I haven't had a lot of experience working with children. Most of my experiences with adults and some teens and adolescents. But in terms of like children who are in that situation where they're witnessing violence, like there's a high correlation between people who are in violent relationships that maybe have like a history of childhood abuse or witness violence in their home. So in a large way, it does sometimes become like a pattern, a cycle. And a lot of that has to do with when you're used to seeing something that becomes normal for you. So when you get into a relationship that's mimicking what you saw in your home, then there is, like Karina said, you may not even be aware that this is an abusive situation, because it's just normal. So I think that's a part of why ending this whole I would call it a pandemic of violence against women is so important, because we have to stop those cycles from happening. And it's very detrimental to children. It impacts, how they're raised and the type of relationships that they get into when they grow up. But that's just my thoughts on like children when it comes to these situations.
Yeah, I can imagine that when a person is trying to protect themselves, and then they have the challenge of having to protect their children on top of that, that also plays into the psyche of how they deal with a situation. So when you have a client that comes in and really is not thinking about themselves, but they're thinking about their children, what does that look like in the counseling room?
Yeah, in my experience, sometimes that can be a reason. Sometimes a person that has children that's in an abusive situation may want to actually stay in the relationship because they want the child to have a two-parent home. So sometimes it can become a factor why they actually stay.
Right.
And So there's that part of it. And then for some people, it could actually be their motivation to leave because they want to protect the child. So it can look different in different situations. And then it can also become a complicated factor with how to get out of the situation if they don't have the financial support to care for themselves and the child.
Right. So can you, either of you, talk a little bit about the success stories and what has happened to some of your clients or some of the people that you know who have been able to break the cycle?
Yes. One thought of a experience I had with a client came to mind, a client that had a long history of abuse in their family and then was coming the first in their family to actually seek help for their own history of intimate partner violence, sexual trauma. And so we did a lot of great work together in kind of examining those family patterns and then working through their own trauma. And then that client actually, in the time that we worked together, got married and became pregnant. And that was it was just a beautiful process to see this person go through their own stage of healing. And then to also talk about, how they want to do things differently for their child that was coming into the world. So that's one example that came to mind, but I've had a lot.
Blossoming, you leave an abusive relationship and then you still find love. You're still able to open yourself up to being able to be in a relationship with someone else as we move forward. That's
Right.
beautiful. So it's not about men, and we only have a few minutes left, but there's relationships when women and men are both in abusive situations, and same-sex partner relationships where there's abuse in that relationship. How different is it that men experience this abuse versus women, or is it basically the same in terms of the psychological impact?
Men, I think there needs to be a lot more conversations centered around men who experience violence, abuse, because they are a lot less likely. I even think the statistics are probably not even accurate because a lot of men don't come forward or report their own instances of abuse because of societal messages of what it means to be a man and how they fear they may be perceived if they come forward with information like that. So that's definitely an area that I think needs a lot more work and awareness surrounding.
Nice. Karina, what about you?
Yeah. I agree with Tamara. It's like we already mentioned that how hard it is to a certain to certain people to reach out for the services, like for example LGBTQ, and also men is one of the vulnerable actually population because usually, as Tamara mentioned, they do not even reach out for help because of a social stigma, because of the other factors that might affect their relationships, their status, and things like that. So it is important not to forget that intimate partner violence is not just about women. I mean, it is disproportionately affecting more women and girls, and that's what our conversation is about today. Yeah. But men also need to be acknowledged, the male victims, male survivors as well, not only homosexual but also heterosexual relationships, those who are suffering from violence.
So we talk a lot about the things that are when we think about IPV and we think about what that looks like, we talked about what mainly is in our public view, right? The intimate partner violence, the sexual violence, harassment, rape, or things along those lines. We don't necessarily talk about it in terms of human trafficking. We don't talk about it in terms of female genital mutilation, and we don't really talk about child marriage. Those are also parts of what is seen as violence against women. How come those
things don't necessarily get as much airtime, so to speak. And what can we do to support those causes as well?
Those type of violence that you mentioned, and including sexual abuse, like and rape, those are very important as well. It's just I'm studying intimate partner violence, so that's my topic. But and human trafficking, like that's one of the main topics, because Orlando is a hotspot for the human trafficking, and we have big coalitions who work, specifically about this topic. The researchers, the the practitioners. There are so many people involved. There are organizations around the Florida state. So all these topics are very, very important, in terms of when we address the violence against women and girls. And you also mentioned like genital mutilations in certain countries.
Yeah, in certain
right.
countries.
There are laws against them in certain countries. They're still on. And then there are things as child marriage and bride kidnapping that are still like going on in certain parts of the world that are oppressing young women and girls, and basically, put them in a certain trap them in a violent relationships for the rest of their lives. So all of that said, and United Nations also mentioned that I think it was over the decade, the attitudes towards violence against women dropped from 75%, but there are still so many issues that needs to be addressed, that needs to be heard, that society needs to be aware about. And as we said, as a community, there are so many things that we can do to prevent violence.
Excellent. So we got a few minutes left, and I want to give you guys a chance to talk a little bit about your platforms and what you seek or what you hope for women, especially women experiencing this. But before we go there, are there some hotlines, or are there other information or websites that we can kind of provide for people to kind of know about who are not necessarily aware?
Well, some of my favorite resources, first, victimservicecenter.org. They are the rape crisis center for Osceola, Orange, and Seminole County. And they also provide services, long-term counseling and advocacy services for survivors of crime, sexual violence. So any form of any crime or sexual violence, and they service everyone, men, female, non-binary, trans, everyone. And there's also, I really like loveisrespect.org. It's a website that provides a lot of information about what is healthy or unhealthy relationships. They're very gender inclusive, very inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community in the way that they write their information. So I think that's a great resource for people to learn more about the signs of abusive relationships and what is healthy. RAINN.org, RAINN.org, is a national sexual assault organization, and they have a national hotline for folks. And I really like the Women of Color Network. They focus a lot on violence against women from minority groups. And their website is WOCNINC.org. So again, that's Women of Color Network, and they have a lot of great information and resources specifically centered on women of color in violence.
And so we know we have CAPS on UCF's campus. Is there also a place for staff members to go to if they are administrators, if they have experiences in this area?
So CAPS, we specifically service students, the student body. So you have to be an active student at UCF to receive our services, but and as somebody commented, there's EAP services that is for staff members who need help or support.
Yes, thanks. Anything to add, Karina?
I just wanted to mention that the UCF Victim Services provide services to students, faculty, staff, and sometimes even visitors to campus. And they also have their phone available day and night, 24/7. It's 407-8 888-223-1200. And like Tamara was already providing so many resources, all I wanted to mention that there is also a Florida domestic violence hotline at 800-500-1119. That is like a general hotline, and a Harbor House that is like a 24-hour hotline. Also 407-886-2856.
Excellent, excellent. And we'll make sure that we have that information attached to the archive footage as well. So definitely thank you. Appreciate you for sharing that information. Any last minute thoughts before we close out for today?
I just want to say, like, speaking from a therapist perspective, I just really want to encourage any survivors out there of any form of violence to, to seek help. Like these, that trauma doesn't go away. Not thinking about it, trying to sweep it under the rug doesn't make it go away. And if seeking help, you can recover, you can heal from these experiences.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that.
All I wanted to add is that I just wanted to refer not only to survivors of domestic violence, but just all of us to be aware of what's going on around us, to be aware of what's going on right next to the house of yours, to your neighbor, to your friend, to your family member. Just let's be more supportive of each other, knowing this hardship that we are in, that we're not alone, that we are all together through it. Yes, and thank you so much, Dr. B, for the invitation to this podcast.
Thank you for being a part of this. When you just said that just now, you made me think, while you can't say any type of violence is more important than the other, it starts off small, right? It starts off very, very small. A person starts to see what kind of controls they can have over someone, and maybe it escalates or elevates to a different level. So to be on the alert is really important. I mean, you talked about that in terms of watching behaviors. If your friend was a certain type of a way and you're starting to see a change in that behavior, to kind of maybe not jump to IPV right away, but at least to be in your mind that, if I'm going to be a good friend, I should be aware of just inconsistencies that may occur, and that might lead to something that's a little bit more challenging. I can imagine that is in a whole lot of different ways that people showcase anxiety. It could be from breaking out. It could be from, like you said, wearing different types of clothes, right? You notice that their whole wardrobe has changed. That may be doing something to hide something. So just being alert and being aware doesn't mean that there's a problem. It means that you're being a good, conscious person with regards to the people that you're dealing with. So I thank you both so much for taking the call and being a part of this today. Matters of Diversity with Dr. B is really kind of geared towards trying to put this information out there. And so I think you both did a phenomenal job, and I just appreciate you so much. So Karina and Tamara, we're going to close out today, and I look forward to possibly chatting with you all again as we move forward, and not just this particular topic, but maybe anything else that could come up that you all would be interested in being a part of the podcast. All right. So thank you, and we're going to just call it a day today. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.